An old man had two sons from two different women. Both boys were much wanted, even longed for children. But the old man was a hard man, intoxicated by his God and great dreams for the future. And his story is not a happy one. First, he loses the older boy. As he grew to the edge of manhood, the boy's stepmother grew jealous and cold. She begged her husband to put him out of the house, to place the family's destiny fully in the hands of her own infant boy. And the father complies, sending his son away, out into the streets, out into the wilderness. The old man turns his back on his own flesh and blood. His heart becomes iron. The two of them will never speak again. And then he loses the younger one. This time, it's not the voice of his wife that the old man heeds, but the terrible voice of God, who comes to him in a vision, in a dream, demanding the blood of his second-born as sacrifice. And so they sneak away together, father and son, early in the morning to escape detection. And they hike off to a distant mountaintop. And there the old man puts a knife to the boy's throat. And while both of them survive this near-death experience, they too will never speak to one another again. Over the course of Rosh Hashanah, we read the story of how Abraham loses both of his sons. Neither dies. In fact, both grow to be the fathers of their own great nations. But with their own father, it's all over. At least, almost. If I could add to the Torah reading for this New Year's Day, I would skip ahead just a few chapters in Genesis and tack on just one more verse. One more verse that for me makes the story complete. V'yikbaru oto Yitzhak v'Yishmael banav el ma'arat hamachpelah. And Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah. Neither Isaac nor Ishmael ever speak to Abraham again after their respective near sacrifices. Beyond coming together for the burial, we have no evidence that the brothers ever rebuild their relationship with one another. And in fact, it seems like all three men can't even coexist in the same verse. And Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, bury him in the cave of Machpelah. No name for the father whom they wordlessly bury together. The scene does not immediately look like a moment of redemption. It's very far from Jacob and Esau crying onto each other's necks, or Joseph breaking down and revealing his true identity to his brothers, or any similar scene, whether biblical or from the most recent Hallmark movie, of reconciliation achieved and familial harmony restored. It's a somber moment. There are no named emotions, no tears or embracing, neither forgiving nor forgetting. There are just two brothers, estranged from one another and from their father, coming together one last time before going their separate ways forever. And yet for me, this verse is one of the Torah's most poignantly hopeful and deeply moving and honest moments. Honest, because as appealing as it might be, I don't know that I believe that we can ever have a truly new beginning. A paper once erased still bears a smudge. A deep wound once healed still leaves a scar. What was taken from these young men, the father whose job it was to love them and to protect them from all harm, come what may, they will never have had that. And nothing makes that okay. Nothing. Never. But it's hopeful too. It's hopeful because when the brothers come together, they're able to literally put the past into the earth. To say that what was, and it's now out of our hands. And then maybe there's the possibility of writing their next chapter in the story of their lives. Last week, I had the opportunity to visit with a beloved teacher, Reb Mimi Feigelson. Reb Mimi was the world's first ordained Orthodox woman rabbi, a teacher of rabbinic and Hasidic literature, and a person of deep and unique wisdom. She was also my first Talmud teacher. She began her study of the Talmud in one of the most traditional of starting places, a winding legal discussion in the second chapter of Tractate Bava Metzia, which begins with the words, Elu Metziot. These are the found things. Over several months, we navigated the twists and turns of the multi-threaded Talmudic argument over the dynamics of finding and losing. For the rabbis, it all came down to one central question. To what length must we go to restore something which has been lost to its original owners? Or in the most concise of terms, when are finders keepers? One of the most important legal concepts to take shape through this discussion is the idea of yeush. Yeush, which means to give up on finding or to let go of. Here's the basic rule. If I find a missing item, I am obligated to make every effort to return it to its rightful owner, so long as there can be a reasonable presumption that the owner has not yet done yeush, has not yet let go of the hope of recovering that which has been lost. So I'll give you an example. If I'm walking down a crowded street and I find a wallet lying on the sidewalk with a driver's license inside, I am obligated to go to every effort to seek out the owner of that wallet and to restore to them their lost property. The owner has a reasonable hope that someone could and certainly should try to figure out who they are. But if, however, I walk down that same crowded street and come across a crumpled wad of loose bills, and I look around and I don't see anybody actively searching for them, I can reasonably assume that the owner knows that they have very little chance of getting them back. And so I can keep what I found, or better yet, donate it to my synagogue. Our responsibility to return lost property is conditional on whether we believe someone is still looking for it. However, the moment that the owner, mentally or in words, acknowledges that what is lost is irrevocably gone, it ceases to be their property anymore. It becomes hefker, ownerless. Not theirs, not anyone's, not anymore. Taken beyond the realm of the lost and found, I have come to believe that yeush is one of the most profound of spiritual concepts and one deeply woven into the message and meaning of these high holy days. Yeush offers us a way to acknowledge the things that we have lost, which we're not going to get back. Of the stories that, as much as we might yearn for it, don't have an alternate ending. Of the things which we can neither forgive nor forget, but must learn to live with. And it invites us to set those things and ourselves free. Yeush is the courage to stop seeking that which can't be found and to reinvest our energy in living the life we actually have. It's a time to honor loss and then to heed one of our tradition's most powerful calls, Uvchartem b'chaim, to choose life over and over again. Some years ago, there was a book published that enjoyed an incredible moment of popularity. It's by a Japanese woman, Marie Kondo, a self-styled organizing guru, and it was called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. How many of you attempted a condoing of your house? Right? The book was so popular, the author's name became a verb, to condo. Your condo. Her method of cleaning was to take everything you own and put it in one big heaping pile, and then to pick up each item individually and ask yourself, does this spark joy? And if so, keep it. And if not, thank that coat or lamp or, God forbid, book for its service and get rid of it for good. A similar book came out more recently by Marguerite Magnuson with the wonderfully weird title of The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. What a great title. She counsels roughly the same procedure. We inventory all of our things, but instead instructs us to ask, is this something I really want to pass down to the next generation? As anyone who has ever stepped into my office knows, I have neither the ability nor interest to condo or Swedish death clean or anything of the sort. True story, when I was in 4th grade, my desk was so chronically overstuffed that in the midst of class, it would landslide onto my lap. And my teacher, Mrs. Blasnick, would stop and turn and with exasperation say, "Adam, has your desk attacked you again?" As I wrote this, with my desk piled with books and high holiday papers, it happened no less than 3 times. I'm a clutter guy. I feel personally attacked by Ms. Kondo's suggestion that one should only keep 30 books at a time. Clearly not a Jew. And I admit to having smiled a little bit, or maybe a lot, when I recently read that since having children, she's decided she needs to relax a little bit. All of that said, the questions that these 2 women ask are precisely the invitation of this season when applied to our inner worlds, aren't they? What if we were to sort through all the things accumulated in our hearts, our grudges and our disappointments, our fantasies and our fears, our ideas of the way that the world should be, and our sense of ourselves, and ask whether holding on to those things is still serving us? To ask whether the baggage we've been schlepping along is actually something we want to bequeath to our children. It's one measure of courage to discard a worn-out coat. It's quite another to discard a worn-out idea, an old ache for something to have turned out differently, to throw away a tired script that we have been playing out too long and which never really served us to begin with. Can we, like Isaac and Ishmael, leaning on their shovels in the darkness of Machpelah, place at least some of those old things in the ground so there can be room for new possibility to grow? Turning from our inner lives to our interpersonal ones, here too there is a need for Yeush. We live in a culture that is deeply conflicted right now in its ideas about forgiveness. On one hand, we're living through a cultural moment in which people who do or even say the wrong thing are subject to immediate cancellation, a seemingly lifelong and incurable ban from polite society. Now, there is no doubt that there are people who do atrocious things and very well deserve their time in the penalty box. But none of us want to live in a world in which we are reduced entirely to the worst thing we ever did or said, do we? We're denied the possibility of change and of growth. That's just too hard of a world to live in. It's too hard for me. I suspect it's too hard for many of us. On the other hand, there's this very strong tendency in our American culture to regard forgiveness as something that we should offer each other all the time, for everything, for free. As Rabbi Dadion Ruttenberg writes in her recent book on repentance and repair, we have been influenced by a certain distorted brand of Protestant Christianity to see forgiveness as a universal good, as something to be freely given whether the perpetrator has done the work of repentance, owned the harm they caused, or even begun to change. As a rabbi, I encounter this all the time. Around this time of year, people come to me and ask, do I need to forgive so-and-so? And then they tell me these terrible stories. Stories of pain and abuse, of betrayal and abandonment. And I always answer the same way. Has the person actually asked for your forgiveness? Have they even acknowledged that what they did was wrong? And the silence that nearly always follows tells me everything I need to know, doesn't it? And I reply, in Judaism, we have no obligation to proactively offer forgiveness to someone who has harmed us, who hasn't yet owned up to what they've done, and at least tried to make it right. They have to take the first step, or you owe nothing. And I watch their shoulders drop, and sometimes the tears start to flow. Because it's one thing to first be hurt, and then another to be shamed for not being willing to say it was all okay. That doesn't work. But so many of us live with this sense that if we were only a little bit bigger people, only a little bit better people, only a little bit more holy people, we'd be able to forgive it all. Release that. It doesn't serve. Between these two broken options, permanent punishment and cheap, unworked-for pardon, lies the redemptive power of Yeush. Yeush is not the same thing as forgiveness. And it's not a replacement for people doing the hard work of accountability, restitution, and change. Whenever possible, our tradition teaches us to strive to repair that which can be repaired, to go as far as we can to make a tikkun, to make a healing. But there are things in our lives that we know will never be made whole. There are hurts that just can't be healed. There are losses for which there is no available restitution. There are people who can't, or let's be honest, won't own up to what they've done. Some words are just never going to get spoken. And since we all know that to be true, it's sad, but we know that to be true, we're presented with a powerful choice. A choice to spend our lives tethered to the past, waiting for a moment that likely will never come, or a choice to let go, not to forgive the unforgivable, not to dismiss or deny the legitimacy or reality of our pain or the righteousness of our side, but to decide not to live defined by those things one day longer. The choice to say, all these things I've carried all these years, they don't belong to me anymore. I relinquish ownership over them. It's free. And so am I. And if we're to leave a more peaceful world to our children, then what's true for us individually must also be true for us collectively. Years ago, Ari Katz introduced me to a young poet named Andrew Lustig. One of Andrew's pieces that have always stayed with me was written in the midst of a summer nearly 10 years ago of terrible violence in Israel and in Gaza, of rockets and recriminations, of loss and of fear. He wrote it almost a decade ago, and tragically, he could have written it yesterday. Andrew wrote of a future where, quote, the bitter and the angry and the seekers of revenge will someday just get tired, where we'll finally weigh the promises of our ancestors against the promises to our children. And his poem concludes with a vision that's not so much of one of lions and lambs cuddled up together in some idyllic scene, one much more muted, but also much more true. He writes, "One day I will shake the hand of the man whose father tried to kill mine, and my father his, and we will not embrace. We will want to strike each other. But out of respect for our children who have found a ball and who've made up a new game where they throw the ball to each other and catch it, we will grit our teeth and pinch our lips and grip as tightly as we can and nod." One day. I don't think that Isaac nor Ishmael ever forgave or forgot the wrongs they suffered. I don't think they should have had to. And I don't expect that today's children of Isaac or Ishmael will ever do the same. But maybe that doesn't need to be the goal. To wait for brothers to embrace, one could wait a very, very long time. So instead, I pray for the courage and the strength, the wisdom, and my favorite word, the grace, that it takes for all people, trapped in cycles of suffering and regret, to make a sacrifice of the awful past, to place it in the earth, and to commit to liberating future generations. It's the only way. A final reflection from the Talmud. There's a debate, big surprise, a rabbinic debate, about what to do with a torn mourning garment after the time for Shiva is past. One of the most ancient and viscerally powerful rituals of Jewish mourning is Kriya, is the physical rending of a piece of clothing just before a beloved family member is buried. While today most of us do Kriya on a ribbon pinned to our shirt or jacket, in its original form, we ripped through our actual clothes and wore that ripped garment throughout the week of Shiva as a visible reminder of our inner sense of being torn apart. We literally wear our broken heart on our sleeve. But what happens to the garment after Shiva? One side says we leave our Kriya forever torn in the back of the closet because our hearts never come back together again. And I understand that. And the other side says we mend it because time is the great healer, because we get better. And I understand that too. So what do our sages decide? Yes, stitch it up, they say, but use only loose stitches. In other words, fix the garment, but leave a scar. Because the past can't and shouldn't be erased as though it never was. Because we all live with all of our accumulated scars, invisible and visible, and each one tells a story. Because life breaks all of our hearts in some ways that don't ever entirely disappear. And also we're obligated to choose life and to carry it with us and to carry on. This past week, I met with a woman who last year buried her deeply beloved husband of nearly 60 years. I asked her what she wanted from the next chapter of her life. And she looked at me and said, "I'll never stop missing him, and still I want to live." At the start of a new year, I invite us to exactly that kind of strength. To the strength of Isaac and Ishmael. To the strength to live looking forward. To do the awesomely and exquisitely difficult work of letting go. To embrace a new dawn. A path paved in freedom. A journey whose course we set for ourselves. Shana Tova.